The crystal chandelier glimmered above the grand dining table as laughter filled the mansion. But in one shocking moment, the sound of a glass shattering silenced everything. Evelyn Carter, dressed in diamonds and pride, turned toward her trembling maid. "Rosa," she barked. "You can't even serve water without spilling it. Look at you, are pathetic." Her words cut deeper than broken glass. The guests looked away, pretending not to see the poor girl's tears sliding down her cheeks. But one man didn't look away, her husband, Mark Carter. His hands clenched beneath the table. His eyes, filled with guilt and sorrow, stayed fixed on Rosa. To everyone else, it was just another outburst from a spoiled wife. But to Mark, it was torture. Because that poor maid wasn't just a servant. She was his past, his secret. The woman who once held his heart before wealth and duty tore them apart. And tonight, in front of everyone, that buried truth was about to rise again. If you're today's kind of reader, someone who believes that love stories don't always follow the well-worn path, and that the truth can be more raw, more beautiful than fiction, then I'd love for you to join me. If your heart stirs when you hear about love that blooms in the shadows, when you cheer for underdogs and unexpected connections, then this story is for you. If you enjoy wondering how two people from different worlds can meet, clash, heal, hurt, and find something real, go ahead and tap like, share your thoughts in the comments, and if you love this kind of honest, emotional storytelling, please subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. I mean it, subscribe if you want more stories that speak to class divides, hidden feelings, raw truths, and love that defies expectation. I invite you to become part of this journey. At the end you might feel anger, sadness, hope, or maybe all three, and I'd love to hear which one hits you hardest. Do you believe someone can rise from humiliation and find dignity? Do you think love can survive betrayal, or must it transform into something new? Your voice matters. Drop a comment, share this story with a friend who's ever felt misunderstood or overlooked, hit the like button if you're ready for the twist that comes later, and if you're not yet a subscriber, consider clicking that so you'll be here when the next chapter drops. Now, let's step into our story. If you're ready, keep reading, watching or listening, whatever format this will be, as we dive into lives changed in one moment, and love born in the most unlikely place. Texas, USA, a land of wide skies, old money, and quiet secrets. In one of its richest suburbs stood the Carter Mansion, a house built not only with wealth but with pride and appearances. Behind its golden gates lived Evelyn Carter, the woman everyone envied. Her beauty was flawless, her clothes expensive, and her smile rehearsed for social media. But behind closed doors, her heart was colder than marble. Her husband, Mark Carter, was a man of few words, the kind of man whose silence said more than speeches ever could. Once a dreamer, now buried in work, Mark lived a life many desired but few understood. The truth was, his marriage to Evelyn was never built on love. It was a transaction, one that cost him his happiness. And then there was Rosa, the maid, quiet, gentle, and barely 26. She came from a poor Mexican village, carrying nothing but faith and the hope to help her sick mother back home. Every dawn she swept floors that shined more than her future, yet her smile remained warm. 3 lives under one roof, one ruled by pride, another by guilt, and one by grace. None of them knew that love, pain, and truth were about to collide. Long before the mansion, before the diamonds, and before Evelyn's name was ever tied to his, Mark Carter was just a man with a dream and an empty wallet. He met Rosa on a rainy night, years ago, in a small diner off the highway. Mark was a struggling salesman then, hungry, tired, and too proud to admit he had nothing left. Rosa was working double shifts, cleaning tables, and serving coffee to strangers just to send money home to her sick mother. That night, she noticed him sitting alone, staring into his cold coffee. Without a word, she refilled his cup and slipped a slice of pie onto his plate. "You look like you need something sweet," she said softly. That simple kindness broke through the wall he'd built. They talked about dreams, about loss, about what it meant to start from nothing. He told her, "Someday, I'll make it big. And when I do, I'll come back for you." But life had other plans. A year later, Mark was forced into a business marriage with Evelyn, the daughter of his father's investor. Rosa never heard from him again. Until fate, with its cruel sense of irony, placed her in his mansion years later as his maid. It started quietly, like a whisper that no one else could hear. Rosa had been working at the Carter mansion for barely 2 weeks when she first saw him again. She almost dropped the tray in her hands. Time had changed him. Mark was older, sharper, dressed in wealth, but his eyes were the same. Those same brown eyes that once looked at her with warmth now carried a shadow of regret. Mark froze too, his breath catching as recognition hit him like lightning. He didn't speak. Neither did she. But something old and unfinished hung in the air between them, heavy and alive. Days turned into weeks. Rosa avoided him whenever she could, hiding behind chores and excuses. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. It kept placing them in the same room. A spilled coffee, a broken vase, a late-night light left on in his office, each moment pulled them closer to a truth they couldn't ignore. One evening, Mark found her in the kitchen, quietly bandaging her hand after breaking a dish. Without thinking, he reached for her hand. "You're still too gentle," he said softly. "And you're still too proud," she whispered back, eyes glistening. He smiled, a small, broken smile that carried years of pain. "I thought I'd lost you forever." "You did," she replied. "But maybe I was meant to find you again, only this way." From then on, their connection deepened in silence. When Rosa served dinner, he watched her hands. When she passed in the hallway, he caught her scent. Their hearts spoke the language of memories, unspoken, forbidden, but undeniable. Mark started spending more time at home, under the excuse of needing rest. He noticed things about her others ignored, the way she prayed before bed, how she hummed softly when cleaning, how she smiled through exhaustion. She reminded him of who he used to be, a man who once valued kindness over wealth. But their growing closeness didn't go unnoticed. Evelyn's sharp eyes caught every glance, every pause. She began to ask questions. "Why do you always defend her?" she'd hiss. "She's just doing her job," Mark would reply calmly, though his voice trembled. Every word, every look, was a dangerous step closer to ruin. Yet neither Rosa nor Mark could stop what was happening. Love doesn't need permission, it grows where it wants, even in the wrong places. One night, Mark found her crying behind the garden, clutching a letter from her sick mother. Without a word, he pulled her close. She wept into his chest, and for the first time in years, he felt alive. "I can't do this," she sobbed. "You belong to her." Mark's voice cracked. "No, Rosa. My name belongs to her?" "My heart never did." Their eyes met, and for one trembling second, the world fell silent. But before anything more could happen, Evelyn's voice echoed from the balcony. "Rosa! Where are you?" Rosa pulled away, fear flashing across her face. Mark whispered, "Don't be afraid. This time, I won't let you face it alone." And with that promise, destiny began to move again. It started as whispers in the hallways, glances at the dinner table, and quiet tension that even the walls could feel. Evelyn Carter wasn't a fool. She noticed the softness in her husband's voice whenever he spoke to the maid. The same man who barely looked at her now seemed alive whenever Rosa entered the room. Her pride couldn't take it. Evelyn began to test Rosa, first with subtle cruelty, making her clean the chandelier alone, sending her on errands meant for two, accusing her of carelessness. Rosa bore it all in silence. But Mark noticed. He saw the exhaustion in Rosa's eyes and the trembling in her hands. Every time Evelyn insulted her, something inside him cracked a little more. "Why do you keep defending her?" Evelyn snapped one morning when Rosa left the room in tears. "Because she's human," Mark said quietly. "She's a maid, Mark. Don't forget who you are." He looked at her, calm but cold. "Maybe that's exactly what I've forgotten, who I am." From that day, the house turned into a battlefield. Evelyn's jealousy grew into hatred. She watched every movement, every smile, every moment between them. One afternoon, she called a group of friends for tea. With Rosa serving, Evelyn deliberately knocked over her cup. "Look at her," she sneered. "Even tea trembles in her hands. Worthless." Rosa's eyes filled with tears as everyone laughed. But what Evelyn didn't know was that Mark was watching from the doorway, and that moment would become the spark that burned everything she thought she controlled. Rosa decided that night she would quit. She couldn't bear the humiliation anymore. But as she packed her small bag, Mark found her in the servants' quarters. His voice was low, desperate. "Please, don't leave." "Not yet." "Why, Mark? So your wife can destroy me?" "No," he said, his eyes filled with pain. "Because there's something she, and you, don't know yet." And with those words, the stage was set for a truth that would shake every corner of their lives. It was supposed to be a night of celebration. Evelyn Carter's grand charity gala, hundreds of guests, a glittering chandelier, and photographers capturing her perfect smile. Every detail screamed wealth and control. But beneath the elegance, tension was boiling like a storm behind glass. Rosa moved quietly among the guests, serving wine and hors d'oeuvres, her eyes down, her heart pounding. She had promised herself this would be her last night in the mansion. She couldn't endure another day of humiliation. Mark had asked her to wait, but she couldn't. Not after everything. As the music swelled, Evelyn raised her glass for a toast. To loyalty, love, and the people who know their place. Her smirk cut through the laughter. Then, deliberately, she turned to Rosa. "Come here," she ordered. The crowd fell silent. Rosa stepped forward, clutching her tray. Evelyn's voice dripped venom. "Tell everyone, how long have you been trying to seduce my husband?" Is that why you wear those tight uniforms? To climb into his bed?" The room gasped. Rosa froze, tears welling up. "Mrs. Carter, please." "I would never." "Liar!" Evelyn shouted, her voice echoing off the marble walls. Then, in front of everyone, she slapped Rosa across the face. The sound cracked through the air like lightning. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, slowly, Mark stood. His voice, calm but trembling, sliced through the silence. "That's enough, Evelyn." She turned, stunned. "Enough? She's nothing. A servant. She should." "She's not nothing," Mark said, his voice breaking. "She's the reason I'm alive today." The crowd murmured in confusion. Evelyn's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" Mark looked around the room, his guests, his wife, the woman he'd lost years ago. "Years before this," he began, "I was broke. Homeless. I had nothing. I almost ended my life one night in a diner. But he pointed to Rosa, she fed me when I couldn't afford food. She gave me hope when I didn't believe I deserved it. She saved me." Rosa's tears flowed freely now, and Evelyn's expression crumbled. Mark continued, "I loved her before I ever met you. My father forced our marriage to save his company. I did it out of duty, not love. And the truth is, he looked at Rosa, I never stopped loving her." The crowd gasped. Evelyn staggered back, her face pale as glass. You're humiliating me." Mark shook his head sadly. "No, Evelyn. You did that yourself." She screamed, throwing her glass to the floor before storming out, her sobs echoing through the hall. Mark turned to Rosa, eyes wet. "I'm sorry for everything I put you through." Rosa whispered, "You don't owe me sorry, Mark. You owe yourself peace." And as the guests watched in silence, the two stood there not as a maid and her master, but as two broken souls who once shared love, now facing its cost. The mansion was silent the morning after the gala. No guests. No laughter. Only the echoes of words that could never be taken back. Evelyn had left before dawn. Her clothes, her jewelry, her pride, all gone. What she left behind was heavier, shame and emptiness. The tabloids would spin their stories, but inside those walls, it was only truth that remained. Rosa sat in her small room, a packed suitcase by her feet. Her hands trembled as she folded her maid's uniform for the last time. She knew what she had to do, leave before the world turned her pain into gossip. When Mark knocked on her door, she didn't turn around. "Are you really going to disappear again?" he asked softly. "It's better this way," she whispered. "Your life's already in pieces because of me." He stepped closer, his voice breaking. "No, Rosa. It's not because of you. It's because I spent years living a lie. You just reminded me what truth feels like." She turned then, eyes glistening. "And what now? What do we become?" He looked down, struggling for words. "I don't know. But I know I can't lose you again." Rosa smiled sadly. "You won't. I'll always be part of your story, Mark, just not in your house." He took her hand, holding it like something fragile and sacred. "If you go, at least let me help you start over." "You already did," she said softly. "You gave me back my dignity." At the bus station, the morning sun stretched across the quiet road. Rosa stood with her suitcase, watching the world move forward. Mark stood beside her, silent. "This time," she said, "I'm leaving on my own terms." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "And I'll be waiting, not to stop you, but to see you fly." She smiled one last time before stepping onto the bus. As it pulled away, Mark stood still, hands in his pockets, watching until she disappeared into the horizon. Months later, newspapers wrote about Mark Carter again, not for scandal, but for redemption. He sold his mansion and used the money to start a foundation that helped poor women in Mexico find education and safety. One of the schools was named Rosa's Light. He never saw her again. But sometimes, when the Texas wind blew through the open fields, he swore he could hear her voice, soft, forgiving, and free. Love isn't always about ending up together. Sometimes, it's about learning what love truly means: sacrifice, forgiveness, and freedom. Mark learned that wealth can build a mansion, but only kindness can make it a home. He had chased success so long that he forgot what warmth felt like, until Rosa reminded him. Her humility was more powerful than Evelyn's diamonds, her silence louder than all the words he'd buried in his heart. And Rosa, she learned that love doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes, walking away is the bravest way to love. She left not because she didn't care, but because she did. She chose peace over pain, dignity over dependency. Years later, people spoke of the Carter scandal like gossip, but for Mark and Rosa, it was never about scandal, it was about redemption. Because love built on pride will always crumble, but love built on compassion will echo through time. In the end, Rosa didn't just leave the mansion. She left behind a lesson, that the poorest hearts can hold the richest love, and that even after humiliation, grace can still rise like morning light. And now, dear listener, tell me, what would you have done? If you were Rosa, would you have stayed and fought for love, or walked away to protect your peace? If you were Mark, would you have chosen truth sooner, even if it meant losing everything? Stories like this remind us that real love isn't always wrapped in perfect endings. Sometimes it arrives as heartbreak that heals us, or as courage that helps us let go. So if this story touched your heart, if you believe kindness still matters, if you've ever loved someone you couldn't keep, please drop a red heart hash in the comments. Tell me what lesson you're taking from wife humiliated poor maid in front of her husband, and this happened. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want more emotional, true-style stories about love, betrayal, dignity, and redemption. Because sometimes, the most beautiful stories aren't about falling in love, they're about finding yourself through it. Thank you for watching, for feeling, and for believing that even broken hearts can still beat beautifully.